Well, welcome everyone. So glad to see you here. We're so excited for tonight's program. I'm Sonia Osorio. I'm the Executive Director of the National Organization for Women here in New York City. We have the most extraordinary panel of experts and thought leaders assembled for you here tonight. For our panel, welcome Women Uniting Against Extremism. First, a huge thank you to our host, Sullivan Cromwell, and especially to Steve Pinkin for making tonight possible. Sullivan Cromwell stepped up to host this without hesitation. That takes not only generosity, but in today's world, courage. Last week was the 23rd anniversary of 9/11. It happened outside of these windows here in this neighborhood. I, like so many of you, were right smack in the middle of it. So many of us were stunned by it. We didn't understand it, but our world changed forever. The feeling in New York and across the country, with few exceptions, was one of unity of sorrow for the victims and their families, and clarity of the outrage against the terrorists who had trained and set in motion a plan of premeditated murder of as many Americans as they could. That kind of evil, as we all know, is not gone from our world. We have seen terrorists filled with hate attack innocent people in the name of a cause, including on October 7th. As a country, we understood on 9/11 that violence, rape, murder, extremism is never justified. But that clarity and courage did not exist for so many on October 7th, 2023, when Hamas terrorists attacked civilians and families in their homes and young festival goers, raping and murdering as many innocents as they could. We need to remind the world as loudly and as often as we can. And that's what we're here to do tonight. And there is no one better to do that than Congressman Richie Torres, who has been a true leader with moral clarity and courage, even in the face of some pretty harsh criticism and backlash. Thank you so much for being here tonight with us.
Oh no, that's very kind. I am not Trevor Noah, so. But you know, it's an honor to be here, and I feel like I'm in a room with powerful women. I'm convinced if the world were run by women, we would not have all these problems. But you know, as we reflect on the anniversary of both 9/11 and October 7th, you know, the theme of extremism weighs heavily on all of us. And for many of my friends, particularly in the Jewish community, almost as traumatic as October 7th itself was October 8th, where the images of fellow Americans cheering and celebrating the cold-blooded murder of children and civilians in the heart of Times Square, in the heart of New York City, which historically has been a sanctuary for all people, including the Jewish people, which is a miracle in human history. And so many of my friends went through the shock of discovering their loneliness in an uncaring world. And I'm often reminded of the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, who said that history will record that the greatest tragedy is not the strident clamor of the bad people, but it's the appalling silence of the good people. Or Elie Wiesel, who said the opposite of hate is not love, of love is not hate, it is indifference. And what we've seen from the political establishment, from college and university administrators, is widespread indifference and silence and even outright cowardice. I find it appalling that UN Women, which is supposed to be the women's rights arm of the United Nations, went months without even uttering the word about the sexual atrocities that were perpetrated. And I tell people, if you know, this is not only about Israel, this is not only about the Jewish community, no, this is about our country and our civilization. and our collective humanity, if we cannot bring ourselves to condemn in the clearest possible terms murder and rape and torture and abductions, then we have to ask ourselves, what are we becoming as a society? Like, we are in danger of rotting from within at the hands of extremism. And we know that there's nothing new about extremism, right? In many ways, the 20th century was the age of extremism, right? We lost more than 200 million people from wars and state violence, largely at the hands of totalitarian regimes that specialized in extremism and disinformation. So what's new is not extremism. What's new is the algorithmic amplification of extremism on social media. Social media enables extremism to spread on a scale and at a speed that we simply have never seen before. That's disorienting. And so we have to confront the threat of extremism and anti-Semitism and racism and bigotry in every form with the fierce urgency of now. One of the expressions that I hate the most is we lie to our children. We tell them sticks and stones might break your bones, but words will never hurt you. And it's the greatest lie we tell, because nothing is more dangerous than ideas and hate and words born out of extremism. We know that ideas and words have the power to incite hatred that can harden into violence. And what we see in our country, what we see throughout the world, is a great hardening of hate into violence. And so we as a country have a choice. We can either choose, I'm confident we will remain a democracy. But the question is, are we going to be a liberal democracy or an illiberal democracy? Are we going to be a country that embraces a politics that is unified by our common humanity? Or are we going to be divided by hate and fear and extremism? And so I hope our country chooses wisely, and I hope we embrace the wisdom of the powerful women in this room. So thank you for having me. And you can catch me on Comedy Central, The Daily Show. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressmember Ritchie. It was just the most special, brilliant person with such unbelievable moral clarity, and you've taken enormous risks in speaking out on a personal level. Yet you have a guiding light of clarity that always directs you. Thank you.
I always do my vote.
We have a lot of mamas in the room here. So we're so pleased to have all of you. Ruth just flew in from Israel, got some sleep last night, thankfully. And I'm going to start with you. You have programs, so I'm not going to read bios. But Ruth wears many hats. She's been a diplomat. She's was a member of the Knesset. She's a brilliant on-air commentator, writer, lecturer. She's also an Arabist and lived in Egypt as a diplomat and speaks from a wealth of experience and deep knowledge. Wendy sprung into action as a filmmaker on October 8th, and I know her, and she has not stopped since. She's interviewed, what is it now, 100 and...
Something like 85.
85 people.
Including Congressman Richie Torres.
Yes.
Who's a big character in the film.
In her film that's coming out, premiering next month. Mm-hmm. And it looks at the surge of anti-Semitism and radicalization after October 7th. And then Anila Ali is a Muslim American Pakistani faith leader, educator, and author. And she founded the first Muslim American civil rights organization to empower women to become the first line of defense against extremism. And Anila, you've also paid a very high price for ringing alarm bells and speaking out. Jennifer Long. Jennifer is a friend and also the CEO of and co-founder of Equitas, which is an NGO based in Washington, D.C., and she trains and provides expert resources to prosecutors and other professionals handling a whole range of cases involving sexual violence, from trafficking to intimate partner violence to stalking. And she's a legal scholar and an outspoken and passionate advocate for women. And then you have longer bios right on your chairs. So I want to start with each of you briefly touching on your why. Why have you had the imperative to speak out on this issue at this time? What motivates you? What guides you? And why are you here? Ruth, will you start? Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you, Congressman Torres, for your bravery, for your courage, and for your moral clarity. I'm very, very honored to be, there are a few men here, but with so many women, it's empowering, and it's making me feel like there's really very little that we cannot do. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Look, it's very difficult to be Jewish, Israeli, a woman, plus living in an Arab country for 3 whole years and to sort of not do. You can, but it's very, very difficult to run away from your identity. I believe very, very strongly in the heart of the Jewish peoplehood. I think that there is a silver lining to this very intensely difficult period. And that is the coming together, the potential coming together of people within Israel and also the Jewish people throughout the diaspora. It's not the Jewish diaspora and Israel. It's together, but also other morally oriented people who value the things that the people in this room value. And this is, I think, the difference that many people don't quite get. This is not an October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel or the Jewish people. It's not radical Islam on Israel or the Jewish people. This is an attack, literally, like in the movies, of the bad guys versus the good guys. It is an attack of radical Islam against people that value the shared ideals that we all have: freedom, equality, brotherhood. Congressman, you spoke about humanity. On October 7th, humanity wasn't there. It was so bad that it makes one wonder what kind of level of indoctrination people had to go through to be able to rape one after the other, when it was a father, a son, and an uncle raping the same woman. To be able to call your mom and record the call, boasting about killing with your bare hands 10 Jews.
Let me ask you, so we're going to get much more into the ideology and talk more about that. But what I heard you say is it's really the good versus the evil, yes. The bad versus the good, and our shared values drives you to speak out. Wendy, could you talk a little bit about what brings you to
Sure.
this issue?
First of all, thank you. Thank you, Rachel, for putting this together. Congressman Torres, I mean, you're amazing. Thank you for speaking out. Just give it up for Congressman Torres. And I want to actually, he doesn't know this yet. He hasn't seen this, but the film poster and the subtitle of the film is inspired by the congressman, who there's the film is called October Hate. And the A is actually the number 8. And you see the 7 turning into the 8, because really this is a film about the aftermath, but the subtitle is The Fight for the Soul of America. And that comes from Congressman Torres's interview with me. I was inspired because of October 8th, because I saw what was happening in the streets of America. I live in New Jersey. I have 2 college-age students. I saw what was happening right away on college campuses and on social media and in the streets of America. And I couldn't believe it. And I was shaken to my core. Like so many in the Jewish community, it felt like at a DNA level, at a genetic level, we woke up. We were so horrified, so gutted by that feeling. And people started texting me, friends of mine who are like barely Jewish, who maybe have never been to Israel, were texting, I feel gutted. And that's when I knew something bigger was happening. It wasn't just impacting me. And I've always been pro-Israel, and I was an activist on my college campuses. And I sort of always, I know a lot about Israel, and I've always been engaged. But when I saw what was happening among the sort of diaspora community, I realized something was triggering us at such a deep level that something very unusual was going on. And I'm not Israeli, and I can't speak for Israelis, but I can speak for what was happening here. And I knew I needed to document it. And within a couple of weeks of October 7th, I put together a film treatment. I started shopping it around to all of the production studios where I've worked in the past. And not surprisingly, everyone said no. No one was going to touch this. And I thought, well, I got to do this on my own. And my very first shoot was the Israel rally on November 14th in DC, and the congressman was speaking there. And I just hired my own crew, paid out of my own pocket, and drove down to DC and planted my flag and said, I'm doing this film. And actually, the congressman may not even know this. He was my very first interview on December 5th. There's a lot going on here. It's very full circle because the film's coming out next month. But he said yes right away. And I actually happened to be on Capitol Hill on December 5th, which was the day that the congressional hearing was happening with the college presidents, right? So I was in that room about 45 minutes before I actually sat down to do the interview with the congressman, and it was extraordinary. I could not believe what was going on. The day before, I was at the United Nations when Sheryl Sandberg had called and others had called for the hearing to push the United Nations and UN Women to actually come out and say something about Hamas, and say something criticizing, what had actually happened, and say something in support of Israeli women and girls, which they had not. They were silent. So all of that really fed into my film, and it's why I'm here today. I mean, I just was moved to action because I couldn't believe the silence and the hostility. It was that combination that just drove me to creating a film. And I think when I speak for other people in the Jewish community, people here in America woke up. They woke up like never before. And I think now that we're awake, we can do something about it.
And Wendy, we're going to get into what you witnessed, what you've observed, and what you've taken away from this almost year of filming. Anila, will you tell us a little bit about your why? Why is, because you've taken a lot of personal risks speaking out.
Yes, first of all, I want to thank you for putting this together. Just a few months ago, it was Hadassah and AMMWEC, and we thought like we are the only two organizations. But I'm so happy to see, mashallah, that today we have 4 Jewish women and 3 Muslim women that are here. My colleagues are here as well. That's what we need to do. Remember that we are women. My dear friend Ruth is here, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that 2 years ago, we were on to something beautiful. We had taken the Muslims in America, had gone on a tour of Israel. She hosted us at the Knesset, and we had the first Pakistani Jew who got a passport from the government saying Judaism is his religion, first time in history. We had Bangladeshis, we had Malaysians, we had Indians, and we had men too. And everybody was so happy. And everybody was like, we want Pakistan, Bangladesh, everybody to normalize relations with Israel. And in those 2 years, I was welcomed in Muslim countries with my group of women and men. And we were thinking, oh my gosh, Saudi Arabia needs to do this. Just a few days before that, October 7th happened. And you can imagine, I think Ruth and I we thought like that's the end of our Abraham Accords. What's going to happen to the world? And I happened to take a stand, what I thought Allah had told me. And I want to read a verse from the Quran, which made me who I am today, and take that stand on November 14th and stand with the Jewish people and Israel. The verse is fundamental to Islamic beliefs. It is, we have honored the children of Adam. not Muslims, not Jews, not Christians, not Hindu. Who are the children of Adam? It is all of us. It is each and every one of us. And we do not, as Muslims, know that message of God. And that's why some of us have gone astray. And if we actually go back to the teachings, the universality of our religion is going to tell us that you are our brothers and sisters closer than anybody else, because we follow monotheism. And so do you. And we are all the children of Abraham. On October 7th, of course, my organization, I lost many members, but I looked at what had happened, and I was talking to friends, and, I was getting all these messages. And this friend of mine, who's a Burmese lawyer with a very famous law firm in DC, he's like messaging me and saying, Anila, you must be really upset, and you've worked really. Yes, I'm upset. I'm really outraged. And then he talks, and then, when I explained to him all about our trip and how we are working, Arabs and Israelis want peace. What is wrong with us? And then he says, but don't you think they deserved it? I told him never to call me again, that I never want to speak to him again. But I didn't know that was the first loss, my friend, the first friend I lost. And then I started losing my board members and my family. And the next day after I spoke at the rally, yes, my children were attacked from Pakistan, Dubai, England. My families, they threw me out of all the family groups. But I knew that I had to reclaim my religion from these terrorists. When we could do that after 9/11, why can't we do that now? This was an affront to all of us, to our religion. If we believe in Islam, we have to speak up. And with that message, I stood up and I said, okay, we're going to do something. And then you saw what happened in Washington, D.C. There was a desecration of the American flag. We did not come here, and I can speak for my sisters here, I can speak for myself and many Muslims. We did not come here to see that, to see the flag of Hamas being replaced by the US flags. We came here to live just like you all do, to be Americans, and to know that today religious freedom we have to pray and to go to a mosque without going through security is because of the American values. And what are our children doing? They're desecrating and violating those values. And I'm sorry to say that my Jewish brothers and sisters have to go through security. They need security for the synagogue, and Muslims are just walking into their mosque and some are spewing hatred. And as a Muslim, as a mother, we're all speaking up. And that is why I want to tell you, we're here to take back the soul of our religion. We love Islam, and we know Hamas stole it, just like Al-Qaeda did on 9/11. They stole it on October 7th.
Jen is,
I'm going to stand up with you. No. So thank you to my brave women. One is here to meet you from Boston. The other one travels. She's left her husband and children, and she's traveling, doing the work of God.
and Jen, that is very hard to follow, Anila. And
Sure is.
Jen happens to be Catholic, so she is here both as somebody who traveled to Israel with a number of us in the room to bear witness to the sexual atrocities and the aftermath. And Jen, will you tell us why you went to Israel and why you are?
Sure. And I'm a little bit different in that I'm coming at this from a prosecution perspective, and as someone who chose prosecution because I wanted to work on child abuse, sexual violence, intimate partner violence, stalking, crimes where victims are uniquely blamed for the violence committed against them, and crimes where, and I prosecuted in Philadelphia, where you would see religion come in and be used by abusers, because the religion itself is not evil. when it's not radicalized, but used to either justify, used to subjugate, used to silence. And through work at Equitas, where we work with prosecutors, a lot of what we do is talk about how we approach these cases. And when we talk about how to try a case, you think about voir dire, the community, how you're educating people, how you're talking to people. And in all of the time, as a prosecutor in the 90s, and then through Equitas, and we've worked throughout the entire United States and internationally, I was struck. It took me a while, to be honest. It took me about 4 days to feel the silence, because in our work, we're the doers. We are supporting our advocacy sisters, but I'm in a field. I'm in an anti-sexual violence field, and there are people who are very prolific and communicate in that field. And there was a lot of silence, an unusual silence that was unsettling. And it certainly made me sad, but it made me very angry, because it was so obviously different, because the people, and I think that this was what really moved me, the people who we count on, actually who we count on to lead us, our advocacy partners, were silent, we're minimizing, we're discrediting. And, we're in a field where the prosecutors are usually educated, and there's a discrediting, and then publicly there is an element saying resistance by any means, and that was not even enough to bring people out. Mm-hmm. And so while I feel that it was a gift to be included, to come to Israel, because I felt so helpless at home. I'm a lawyer, not an Israeli lawyer. What can I possibly do? I'm not working internationally. I can't bring a case. But while the Israeli and the Jewish women in Israel and those victims, they're first and foremost, and our job is, I think, to support our partners there. The second piece is to think about this country and other countries where Jewish women now, what will happen when they seek advocacy? What will happen when they come into a courtroom? What is the kind of voir dire? I mean, from an action perspective, I'm now rethinking things that I never thought I had to think of before, which is how to identify the bias and weed it out and then counter it. So that's
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, thank you. Good. So, Ruth, you've spoken extensively about the need to follow the money. I mean, this is something that you do at every turn. Follow the money, funding, armament smuggling, and logistical support. That's funding the spread of this extremism. And it's pushing people and recruiting men and women to become jihadist allies or jihadists themselves. Could you elaborate on the Qatari funding, the Iranian influence and ideology, and what we could do about this siphoning of money and arms that's fueling this?
Okay, so I think it's important to note that radical Islam, let's say, has two major wings. One, the Iranian Shiite wing, led by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I stress the Islamic Republic of Iran and not Iran, because not all Iranians, on the contrary, support that regime. And on the other hand, the Qataris, as you had mentioned, for those who don't remember, there are only 300,000 of them. And their support, let's call it that way, of Muslim Brotherhood and Sunni radical Islam. Now, the Islamic Republic of Iran did not begin a day or two, a month or two, or a year or two before October 7th. They've been meticulously planning the envelopment, first and foremost, of Israel and the Jewish people. But that's only because it's very easy to galvanize support against. The idea behind the ideological stance of that radicalism is basically hegemony, not only in the region, but worldwide hegemony. Sharia-led Shiite Islamic radical domination. I know it sounds like a horror film, but it is what it is. And they've been doing this meticulously and in a very sophisticated manner for years, particularly since 1979, when they actually began their campaign trying to infiltrate groups in the United States of America, in Canada, in Australia, in Europe, and so on and so forth, by actually speaking the language of those groups. So whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's Greenpeace groups, all the certain progressive groups with different jargons in different fields, they've been slowly but systematically infiltrating those groups. That's not yet funding, but just infiltrating idea-wise. At the same time, they're also setting up, this is years ago, cells, Shiite cells throughout the Western world. And simultaneously setting up proxies, we all heard the name proxies, in different regions throughout the world. So it's not only about October 7th and Hamas-led radical Sunni Islam, supported, funded, trained, and incited by the Islamic Republic of Iran, but also the Houthis in Yemen, after disintegrating that society and moving in to take power. Also in the West Bank, led by Mahmoud Abbas, the internationally recognized leader of the Palestinian Authority, completely against the Hamas, and the Islamic Republic of Iran, literally to undermine Mahmoud Abbas, was strengthening Hamas in the West Bank with weapons that it smuggled via Jordan, with funding, and leading to a point where today cities in the West Bank have an amount of weapons that wouldn't shame a small army. Undermining, I remind you, Mahmoud Abbas, the internationally recognized Palestinian leader. Then we have Lebanon with Hezbollah, but also Hamas, trained, incited, funded by Iran. Syria, disintegrated society, ruined economy. This is the modus vivendi of the Islamic Republic of Iran, moving in and then moving in their Shiite militias into Syria, like they did in Iraq as well. There's no longer an Iraq. There's a country called Iraq, but in fact, it's Iran and their Shiite militias ruling Iraq. So the continuity is very relevant. Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, West Bank, and Gaza. And very importantly, we have a teeny tiny little Jordan, where the Islamic Republic of Iran is using the 70 to 80% Palestinian population to galvanize support against the kingdom and strengthening Hamas and basically smuggling weapons via Jordan into Lebanon, the West Bank, and Syria. And the world is saying nothing. Now, Qatar, not having a very strong military like Iran, is doing very much what you had said, funding. It has a lot of money. It's not buying military proxies, but it's paying. It's paying faculty members, it's paying academic institutions, it's paying football clubs, it's paying for the third of London, which it already owns, and it's giving support to organizations that are designated terrorist organizations by a lot of Western countries, including the United States of America, like Hamas. as well as Erdogan. Erdogan not having all the money that Qatar has, but supporting Muslim Brotherhood and extreme Sunni Islamism. If you look at this onslaught of radicalism, both from the Shiites and from the Sunnis, you basically need to take one line away from all of this. And that is, it's not about Israel and the Jewish people. This is just a stop, a tactical stop. We are very focused on October 7th and Gaza. But this is a very tiny first step of the big picture. The big picture is here in the United States of America. Remember, the modus vivendi is to destabilize from within. The polarization, the academic institutions, the schools, that's where they're at. And if you look around, doesn't matter what political spectrum you're coming from, you'll see it, you'll smell it, you'll touch it, and it will touch you.
Thank you, Ruth. That's an enormous amount to unpack. And Wendy, in a minute, I'm going to get to you and we'll talk about how you've seen this manifested on campuses and social media. But Anila, first I want to talk to you a little bit about Muslim women. And with extremist Islamic ideology and controls over women, what are you seeing in terms of women who do not subscribe to this fundamentalism being able to function and thrive in any number of countries where they're Muslim, but they've lost their rights as women, they've lost their freedom of movement, they could lose their life for speaking up? Share with us some of your thoughts and what you see.
So I feel like a dinosaur, but I have been following extremism since 9/11. As a Muslim woman and a leader of a civil rights organization, I, as a woman, had gone to a lot of the Muslim organizations, a lot of the mosques, Muslim Public Affairs Council, Council on American Islamic Relations, a lot of these organizations that I thought majority women. And I went as a Muslim mother hoping that they would give me an equal seat at the table. 15, 20 years ago, they didn't. In fact, the moment we would have like a meeting and then there would be like outsiders, non-Muslims, and there might be a journalist or two, we were told to sit in the kitchen. Sometimes I was told, no, sister, you can't be on this. And I said, why? I come from a country where we elected a woman and she fought terrorism. Benazir Bhutto, I voted for her. I was 18 and I voted for her because I believe, wow, she's fighting Taliban, extremists, Malala. That's the Muslims that I look up to. And I fought with my majority Arab brothers and they would often say, no, sister, you can't do interfaith. And I said, okay, I don't know where they're coming from. I went to the US government at that time and I said, you want us to fight extremism? You're going to help us build our own organization because these men don't give us equal opportunity. We're just token representatives. And then we founded our women's organization. But I can't tell you that the pushback at that time that we got just to do events with the Jewish community, they were our best allies to fight hate. I used the Holocaust curriculum to fight Islamophobia in my classroom with my Jewish teachers and my Christian teachers because they cared, And these Muslim organizations, the moment I turn around, like people turn around, they would come and say, no, you can't eat with the Christians and the Jews. They are not our people. And I said, where does it say that? Let's look at the Quran. I challenged them. They do not like women to challenge them because, like Ruth was saying, these Muslim organizations are funded from, at that time, Kuwait, Qatar, even like the other Middle Eastern countries. And we saw the rise of extremism. Where was it coming? We started the campus movement of Olive Tree Initiative, taking Muslim Christians and Jewish kids and saying, come on, let's go and see what Israel is all about. Let's go to West Bank and let's go to Gaza. Let's meet the people, understand the conflict. We didn't come here to hate the Jewish people and take sides and then hear that these are not our people. We did that movement. We were succeeding, and the funding they were getting that helped them to silence women. There are many Muslim Me Too movements that are going on right now. Who are the women? A lot of them are like me. They have been silenced. And the more we are growing and the more Muslim men are coming forward, we're finding there are many more like me. But the sad thing is that the Muslims who are today standing with Hamas is the savior of the Palestinian and the Muslim world, they don't look at Taliban. They don't look at Afghanistan. That doesn't matter to them. The Uyghur women who are always crying about what happened to them, they don't matter. The Yazidi women, and they're Sunni women. You know, I'm Sunni and I say like, the majority, listen to me. And, you know, this is what the Iranian regime is doing. They want to take over. They've already destroyed Iraq. Iraq was a Sunni ruled Shia majority country. What did they do today? And there's persecution of Sunnis in Iraq. And then, of course, we have persecution of Shias in the Muslim Sunni majority countries. Muslim women, look at our condition in Syria. But, you know, I look at it and I say, my sister Lori Hedry, she was harassed to the point she was admitted to hospital. She had a brain aneurysm by the men in organizations that are funding our MSAs, that are funding our mosques, that are saying to these people that, no, Islam has to be, you know, the caliphate is coming. And we hear that when you turn around or when people turn around, that's what they're talking about. So how will Muslim women like me stand up? You know, it takes a lot to do that. You know, we are still victims of honor killing. We are still victims of harassment, sexual abuse. You know, the woman who stood up, Lori Hedry, here in America. And I tell you, Wendy, she was asked to do a sexual something by the leader of the Muslim civil rights organization. When she went to Muslim organization, she said, I'm the board member of this organization. And this man has done this. They asked her to apologize to the men. And you have to read these stories to find out what is happening in America. And I'll continue.
Thank you, Anila. And we'll get more deeply into this. And Wendy, you've seen this manifestation over all these months on our college campuses, on social media, in the streets in terms of protests. You've really traveled around the country and been to many, many protests. There's rhetoric, there's propaganda, there's a radicalization that you're seeing. Mm-hmm. Could you give us some insight and maybe connect some of the dots?
Sure. And I'd like to connect back to what Ruth was saying before, and I wish I'd interviewed for the film. You're tremendous, and your geopolitical insight is incredible. One of the things that struck me that you said was something that we dig into, which is SJP on campus. That's Students for Justice in Palestine. And this is one of the most compelling scenes, I think, in the film, where we unpack how we got to this moment, right? How did we get to a place where there are Queers for Palestine, where you have LGBT kids on campus, queer students on campus, kids for climate change, kids for reproductive freedom, kids for, name the cause, who are aligning themselves essentially with Hamas. And they're seeing Hamas as freedom fighters, and they're going to these encampments and they feel like it's Coachella, and they're eating granola and they're painting their nails and they're listening to music and they feel like they're part of a community. What they don't understand, they're putting their sort of misplaced optimism about saving the world in the hands of terrorism, right? And it's alarming, it's enraging, but it's also not surprising, because as Ruth pointed out, this has been a long time in the making. It didn't show up in the spring with encampments. It didn't show up on October 8th at Harvard. This has been seeding on college campuses and academia, and in not just with the professors, but also with these organizations, with these social justice organizations. And a really interesting scene in the film that I'm going to give it away, but I think it's really insightful, is we look back at 1993. There was an FBI wiretap at a Philadelphia Marriott where there was basically Hamas in America that the FBI was recording. And they were saying, you know, when we speak to, basically, how do we make our messaging palatable to an American audience? So when we speak to people on the left, we're going to speak in terms of social justice. We're going to speak in terms of apartheid, right? We're going to speak in terms of genocide. Already they're seeding this language. And when we speak to people on the right, we're going to speak in terms of more like patriotism and founding fathers. So it's not shocking that the word apartheid that you keep seeing on college campuses, and genocide and colonialism, all of those sort of buzzy words of basically like the worst things you can call people today in a world where, you know, if you're white and you're a colonialist, that's evil and that's Israel. You know, how did we get to this point? And that's what we're unpacking, that this was really methodical. It was funded, and it's been growing for decades in the making. And as we have one expert say, it jumped the lab. So basically, while this was seeding, we now see the fruition of decades in the making.
Thank you, Wendy. So we're going to shift a little bit, Jen, with your legal hat on. There's been a complaint that was just unsealed. It was actually from February, right? And it was just unsealed against Hamas by the United States government.
By the 7 leaders, I guess.
Yes.
And others.
Will you unpack that for us, and also talk a little bit about what justice for sexual abuse survivors from 10/7 could possibly look like?
Sure. And I mean, and I don't want to minimize, and in fact, Mimi Roca, who we're really missing here, wrote an amazing op-ed, and it is, I don't want to minimize the importance of leaders. I mean, I'm American, so for me, our American leaders standing up and saying factually what happened in their speeches and in their communications, because it's important. And when the Department of Justice says something, even in my world, in my prosecution world, Equitas can write things. We can write about the way of prosecuting sexual violence. But when the Department of Justice writes it and they put it out there, it's important. It has the imprimatur of credibility. We know they have access to intelligence, and they're looking at evidence. So while the complaint is not an indictment, there are arrest warrants issued, and it really doesn't talk a lot about the sexual violence. In fact, none of the charges are terrorism charges. It's a complaint. It's I don't want to say bare bones, but I don't think you should read into it what the full evidence that the government has. But it's important because they have said, and a late voice, not that they were late, but yet just another voice, another evidence of what has happened. I mean, in terms of the justice, the first thing I would say is it's imperative. We must have accountability here. And at the risk of, jumping all over, I'm just thinking about something you said, Wendy, about how the seeds were sown. There are wonderful things about the criminal justice reform movement and the social justice movement that's happened. It's made us all take a look at some hard truths and ways to make things more effective. But in sexual violence, domestic violence, child abuse, stalking, and our crimes, that disparate impact is not on the perpetrators, it's on the victims. That bias inures against the victim, and it keeps them unsafe. And in those movements, interestingly, because there are many incarcerated women, sexually exploited women who are unjustly arrested and prosecuted and charged and incarcerated for prostitution related or crimes related to their trafficking. There are battered women, intimate partner victims who are jailed for defending themselves or for using imperfect violence. Those were not the focus of those movements. And it was always interesting to me. We were a little bit of an outlier because we kept saying, okay, we're going to look at bias right now in this moment, but we're going to look at it from the victim perspective because of what the statistics and what the experiences are telling us. So I say that because when we look at that movement, when we look around the world, I mean, talking about the Taliban in Afghanistan, somehow our name has gotten out. So we get emails. They were flood in the beginning, but we have emails from prosecutors, female prosecutors, other prosecutors, women who are left behind, begging us to help them get out of the country. And the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys is working with, interestingly, a Jewish NGO to help try to organize and work with the State Department. But it is people and women, again, uniquely vulnerable. When we've been to the well, we did not physically go to the DRC. We had was lucky enough to meet Dr. Dennis Mukwege, who got the Nobel Peace Prize in 2018 for his work with women in the DRC who were being raped. We were in Liberia post-conflict, working with South Africa, in Uganda. The people, when it's religious extremism or political extremism, the women and children, what happens to them is next level. Here, so in some ways, this was very hateful, but there were pieces of it. What has never been, and I know someone else in the international space has said it, but I've thought to myself, never in all of our time working on this did any person where we were learning about this or when we're teaching it ask us what the victims did. I don't even think I knew the factions, but I didn't know the political leanings. Wasn't asked what a victim might have done to deserve this or how this might be justified. It has never been accepted. So if there's no accountability here, we have moved the needle to a place that is a truly terrifying place to live because we have opened the doors to rape being something that is possible, potentially celebrated, and openly so. So without going over, just to make you aware, there is a lot of public evidence. I mean, the individuals in Israel, the DNA Project, they are first and foremost on the ground. They are analyzing the evidence, and it isn't even all gone through. I mean, if you think about the hours and probably thousands of hours of footage that the IDF may be going through for terrorism reasons, you have lawyers, sexual violence lawyers going through this. But just from what you know, when we're doing a prosecution, we have, you have the body. You've got documented evidence of nude women being murdered, women being raped, murdered, stripped, tortured, genitals of the men and women being pulled off in multiple places. You have photographs of it. You've got eye and ear witnesses, survivors from Nova and other places, telling you what they saw, telling you what they heard for hours and coming out and seeing the bodies. You have footage. You have defendant statements talking about the footage. You have the morgue personnel. You have the first responders. And I would say I read an article taking it apart where I can't remember if it was the New York Times or some reporters of the Times of Israel. It was a critical of the first responders that they didn't have enough sexual experience to know what they saw. That is ridiculous. We prosecute cases with young children who know what they see. And that's exactly the kind of horrific attacks that a defense attorney will take against a child to discredit them. So we could go on and on, but just to know there are mountains of evidence here that tells you not only did sexual violence happen in one place, but it happened in multiple places, and reports not only by Pramila Patten, but by a part of the UN agency that in its introduction is so biased, and yet they're still finding the evidence of sexual violence. And it's important to talk about this because it happened, and it's important for people so that they can't deny it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jen. Anila, I just want to go back for a moment and talk about Muslim women in countries like Afghanistan, Iran, and what could be done and what are you doing to figure out alliances and supports when there's such a lethality for them to speak out, and we see such a corrosion of rights for women and so much vulnerability.
Yes. You've asked us a very difficult question because we have been trying to do that every time a woman speaks, or even a man when he stands up. There's examples of many. Of course, I gave you the example of Benazir Bhutto, and I gave you an example of a very brave Muslim girl here in America. they get shut down. They get ostracized, they get silenced. I want you to think of Hamas and how they bullied people. And there are many Palestinians, mothers as well, who want to speak out, who want to say Hamas it's a terrorist organization. We don't want them. They take what is due to us and they build all these mass weapons. But they can't, because there's a bullying system that's going on. And that has kind of been replicated here in the United States. And the same thing is going on in many other Muslim countries and communities, especially here. I'm concerned about what's happening here, because the diaspora communities who stood with us after 9/11 and said, yes, Al-Qaeda is bad and we're going to suffer Islamophobia, they don't seem to care about the women. They don't care about the Iranian women. And obviously I stood up for women. I didn't care if it's a Muslim or a Jewish and Afghan or Iranian. What happened? The Iranian regime has put a target on me. That is what happened. So how many women and how many men are going to say, yeah, we don't care about that, fatwa on us. We're going to speak. Also, when men speak, and there are brave men here in the United States that are coming forward and saying, we want to talk about this, sister. How is the funding of organization happening? And we go back to that same thing. Where is the money coming from? Yesterday, I had a meeting with some people in Queens with the Muslims, and they said, you should find out a lot of our mosques get money from the Jewish people. And then they come in and they spew hatred for the Jewish people. And not just the Jewish people, then they talk about the Christian, then they don't like the Shias, then they don't like somebody else. And I said, I'm going to look into it. But I ask you to look into who are your neighbors? Where, if we are giving money to the city and it's our taxpayer money, who are they funding? There is a shelter, and I remember giving money to that shelter, and that was 15 years ago. And Linda Sarsour was sitting right there, and she silenced me because she said, I was running for office, and she said, no, she's not going to speak. If she speaks, I don't speak. And guess what? Do you think they silenced her? No. They silenced me, and I said, okay. I looked at Linda Sarsour, and I said, okay, there is justice. Somebody, it's going to come back to you, Linda. And I walked out. But that shelter is not really a shelter. It's not a safe place for women. Where is our money going? Why are we so afraid to talk about it? And also, I say to, the interfaith community, why are you afraid to talk to our interfaith leaders and say, hey, in your Quran, does it say to kill us? Ask that very poignant question. And let them tell you what they pray in their, the Salah. When we pray 5 times a day, we are praying for the children of Abraham. We're praying for all of you. Then how can we ask to annihilate them? And why are our liberal, young people on campuses, why are they saying all the things that they're saying? Why is a young girl who is, becoming a doctor at Johns Hopkins, she was one of our interns, we're there meeting, the Negev Desert Bedouins who've been butchered by Hamas. And she knows, she sends me a text message with this website. She's a girl and she knows everything because we were talking about it. And she says, you are, and your organization, all of you are going to go to hell because you're supporting. I said, who is teaching her this in America? She's never even been to Pakistan and she's saying all of this. We have to do as Muslims. I tell my fellow Muslims, you need to do introspection. And, a lot of the physicians, as I talk to them and I speak, and I say, who are the ones who've helped you? It's usually a Jewish doctor who's helped a Muslim doctor. It's Jewish neighbor who's always come forward and said, okay, your child got called terrorist, let me help you. And I said, it's time for you to step up. Are you there for them? No, they're not there for the women. Because 1, they're afraid, fatwas, and 2, they've been brainwashed. And this has been happening for the longest time. And I can tell you the new thing that is happening in America, it's ostracization. You can't go to the mosque, you don't get invited to parties. And women sometimes say, okay, I don't want to be out of it.
Right. But you can't say that there isn't a cost to pay for speaking out. I mean, that's the fact.
Of course. I mean, I'm right here in front of you. I'm not able to walk on the streets. I can't go anywhere. And my women, I'm afraid for them too. And my kids come, I have to let the FBI know my kids are here. So please, like, make sure they're safe. And my daughter was saying, don't put any pictures, Mom, the trash I get. My life has changed. And that's the cost. And even
Yes.
more, there are women who will get killed for speaking out. Like Lori, she was almost, they almost killed her.
Right, and there's Masih from Iran, and
Yes.
right, death threats and assassination attempts.
Absolutely.
Ruth, what do we do when there's been this infiltration, both of Qatari funding, Iranian ideology, and it really truly permeates so many of our universities? And we know when young people are educated, they also become the future politicians, journalists, influencers, and it just doesn't end with being at university and having this indoctrination. So where do we go from here?
Okay, it's very difficult to try and capsulate it in a few minutes, but there are certain concrete things that can be done. First, legislation concerning foreign money needs to be looked at and promoted. This is very, very important. There can be foreigners who have either citizenship in the U.S. By the way, this is relevant to any Western country. And then they can donate money as a U.S. citizen. This needs to be looked at from a legal point of view and needs to be taken care of, because the amount of funding that is going into institutions, public institutions, and as I mentioned before, not only campuses and universities, but also schools, is insane. That's number one. Number two, I would look at boards of schools. Take care to look what your kids are studying, not in university and colleges, but at school. This is a very decentralized system of education. These people, both Qataris and the Islamic Republic of Iran, have been doing their homework over years and going from directorate to directorate, from district to district, from board to board, selling a syllabus that in general speaks of Marxism, radicalism, and extremism. This is the United States of America. Marxism, extremism, radicalism. It should really switch on some red lights. Get into the boards. Do what you can. This is on an individual basis. Another thing that is less on the individual basis, and it's huge, but it is doable, and pardon me for being perhaps presumptuous, but it needs to be done. $7 billion are invested in military bases in Qatar. $7 billion are invested in military bases in Qatar. It's very difficult, it's very expensive, it's very political, but it is changeable. That's another thing. Another fact, and here I will stop because of the time limitations, that one needs to take into account is the level of indoctrination and incitement that we know exists in the Middle East. I don't know if you have any idea, but Jordan, which again is an enclave of stability for the United States of America, literally the United States of America maintains military stability in the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. Okay? What the syllabus shows, and this can be checked, nobody needs to sort of lean upon my commentary, is that the hatred of the West, the hatred of Jews, the hatred of Israel, and the hatred of Western values in that syllabus and curriculum is insane. There are things that can be done. If you provide military assistance, you can say, this cannot be done. The same thing for Egypt, although on a lower level. West Bank and the Gaza Strip is exactly the same, with the Gaza Strip being by far the worst of its kind indoctrination, to the point where, as I said before, talking about gang rape, mutilation of bodies, putting sharp objects into the bodies of women, cutting off certain body parts of men and raping men, which is completely haram in Islam, is normalized because of this indoctrination. This is taught. It can be untaught. Yes, it will take a generation, but the international arena and speaking about it can change it because there are leverages on these entities.
Thank you, Ruth. And I think we could really use some more of your insights from what you've seen that are, without giving away your film, which we'll all see. Are there some ways that other dots were connected for you in making this film, some observations that really stood out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I go back to this, it hasn't happened in a vacuum. And it's really, it's shocking, but not surprising, I think is what comes up over and over again. And the social media element of it, right? That this is a war that's playing out online. And that came up over and over and over again for Gen Z who are on TikTok, right? And I interviewed experts, Scott Galloway, for anyone who knows Scott Galloway, he's amazing, is one of the people in the film. And we talk about how China is controlling the algorithms on TikTok and the hashtags that are supportive of Israel versus the hashtags that are supportive of Hamas or Free Palestine or the Palestinians. They're not authentic. They're not authentic in what the kids are seeing, on what's being promoted and what's being pushed out. And so what's at play here is Iran, it's China, it's Russia controlling the algorithms of the various social media platforms and also the bot farms that are pushing things out. So it's not organic. So it's not that 80% of young people today have an irrational hate of Israel and of Jews. But the platforms sure look like that, right? So those are some of the things that we really investigated, which it's definitely alarming for anyone who has a young person at home, and this is how young people are getting their news. It's not surprising then for what they're ingesting and how they're viewing the conflict, how they're viewing Jews, how they're viewing Israelis, how they're viewing Israel, how they see even what happened during October 7th. And all of the misinformation that, in fact, well, it was actually Israel who killed the Israelis. It's not, these women were not raped because, of course, in the Quran it's forbidden and that would never happen. So they have a very warped view of the actual facts on the ground. And that is super alarming. And it goes back to sort of us needing to re-educate. And I love what you're talking about, Ruth, about taking this next generation and what we can do moving forward. There are things to do moving forward. There is hope on the horizon. It's not all you're going to jump out of your window because they're all coming for us. We need to figure it out. And I think that's really where this film lands is allyship and hope and what we need to do moving forward.
Thank you. I mean, given the amount of disinformation and the delegitimization of Israel and obviously the double standards, which we talk about a lot, Jen, how do we change that narrative with our human rights and our women's rights groups? We're both in that arena. We've both felt the silence. We both felt the double standards. How do we shift that narrative?
I mean, for me, I'm just going to go back to, I think that the basics that we sort of took for granted, that there were certain audiences that didn't either have a bias, or if they did, were cognizant of their bias and understood that regardless of whether or not they liked a victim, that there was a right and a wrong, and there was a way of understanding evidence and sort of seeing things clearly. I really do. I really have been thinking about this a lot and thinking about how I would prepare a case. And I think really, truly going back to over prepare, as a sex crimes prosecutor, there's never enough evidence. And I think that's the lesson here. I mean, there is more evidence here than probably any sex crimes prosecutor has ever had in any case, because it comes from so many sources. And it wasn't enough. So I think going back, being methodical about what we know, why it's dangerous, trying to get people to care again about a victim that unfortunately, while we were complacent and we didn't realize how much hate had built up, because it's heartbreaking. There's something has happened where just the slightest bit of compassion isn't there in a way that I think we took for granted. So that's, I think, what I would do.
So before we wrap up, I just want to say, so Sonia's sitting here. There's cards. We could probably take a couple questions.
Only a couple. There's some pencils and papers on each of the stations over here.
Right, and we'll take a couple questions. So in wrapping up, just to leave us with some hope, some way of feeling like there's so many women in this room. There's certainly some extraordinary men in this room. But is there something that we could do as women and forming alliances and connecting with each other? I mean, many of us have, and that's been the silver lining in the horror, is these unbelievable relationships we've formed across religions, demographic differences, geographic differences, and we've really come together. I mean, just in a minute, is there something to leave us with that feels hopeful?
You kick it off.
Yeah, you have to be hopeful.
Yeah. That's it.
First of all, hold your head up high. Be proud of what you are. Don't hide it. Don't hide it. And Anila, you're a model for emulation. I salute you. I know how hard it is to do what you do. And I urge every single one of you, perhaps not to do the same, but to really hold your head up high and do the right thing. Believe me, it works.
Thank you.
We end the film in a hopeful way, and we do it with a montage of college students who are fighting the fight, but also with our non-Jewish allies like Richie Torres and others who sort of represent allyship. And I think that is where I feel optimistic. I'm pretty bullish on this after spending 11 months in a lot of the darkness, that things are going to turn. And I think actually with more of Hamas being exposed in America and the Houthi flag being raised with, the trans flag on college campuses, and the sort of exposure of the ridiculousness of it all, the absurdity, the hypocrisy, that is going to be very eye-opening. And and the burning of the American flag and sort of everything that's going on. I think they tried to cancel Thanksgiving here in New York and Christmas in New York and Rockefeller Center, like all of that stuff. They're shutting down the 405 in Los Angeles. Great. Keep doing that, because I think it's waking people up, to be honest. And I think we're going to be sort of pushed to a place where we're going to say this woke stuff, and, I'm center left politically, but this woke stuff has gone too far. And that's where I'm feeling we're heading. And it gives me hope, because I think liberal organizations, human rights organizations, women's organizations, thank you, Sonia, for your leadership, are really stepping up and saying, this is not right. This is not right, and we need to do something.
Oh, thank you.
Couple of things. Our vision is to see an America where Muslims fight anti-Semitism and Jews fight Islamophobia, and together we fight hate. But there are so many things that I want to also celebrate. One is all of you coming together, and the brightest shining spot here is I see some Muslim brothers who are here, and that is awesome. And I think they are muftis, they're imams, And that did not happen. I want to tell you, we took in the heat of the moment, just a few months ago, we took 50 Muslims from all over the world, majority from Morocco, and an imam from New York, Imam Shahidullah. We took him to the March of Living, and he prayed at Auschwitz with us, with all four of us. We stood there and we prayed. That is what we can make America to be, that we come together. Often we should pray together, but we can't be token kumbaya faith leaders. We need to be strong, and we need to say, do you believe in the existence of Israel? Are you going to, it has a right to exist? Yes, they do. And nobody can take that from them. Arabs and Israelis want to come together. We saw Abraham Accords, and they have survived. It's been 4 years, and we have to make sure that this continues. So this advocacy that we're doing is really important. The other thing I think you should do is empower the moderate Muslim women. They are your allies. And shut down the voices of the extremists. Go to your neighborhood mosque. Get to know your neighbors. A lot of Jewish organizations told me to do that after 9/11, said, no, you guys are really nice. Go say hi to your neighbors and do this and do that. Get into politics. Well, come join us. We are stronger together. And I think that is what is needed for us to empower the mothers, Christian mothers. We fight Christian persecution in Pakistan, Nigeria, Bangladesh. We're doing a lot of work. We're not just doing this. This is work for our posterity, our children. I did not grow up in an extremist Pakistan. And that is why I sit here and I fight, because my father used to take my hand and take me to churches. He used to take me to the Hindu temples, and he said, we are all one human race. Ahle Kitab. I lived Islam. In 10 years, with the invasion of Afghanistan by the Russians, Pakistan changed. I couldn't live there. And so let's try to bring that civility of discourse back. You may not agree with me, but we can never shut each other's voices down. And that's what's happened to our America, our beloved country. Our kids don't want to listen to us. Let's make them talk. Thank you.
Jen, you're one of the most positive, hopeful people I know. So
it is actually, I know I've been a downer, but it is hopeful, because this is I think the most beautiful thing about the work that I'm in, when we get to go, whether it's in the United States, no matter wherever we are, Liberia, UAE, Fiji, I always say every continent, but Antarctica. But you sit down with grassroots people, prosecutors, individuals working, survivors, forensic nurse examiners working in Liberia, seeing, hundreds and hundreds of victims coming in a year, I think 800. But everyone is sharing information, coming together. And we think the criminals have a network on October 7th. And that was just the most recent one. The women in Sudan, DRC, Nigeria, as you pointed out, there are a lot of Afghanistan. There are women suffering right now. And those terrorists and the people harming, they have a network and they share information because there are some footprints that are very similar if you look across. But we have a network too, as a survivors and people on the ground. We learn from each other. We learn from our sisters and our allies who are in countries that have very little resources and yet have done things that are so incredible and innovative. And so that, I think, is the hope, to just remember, to sit and think about all the women who are standing up, and the men and the children. Everyone's standing up right now, and to have them give us hope to just be connected and stand up.
Thank you so much. So I have a question for Ruth, and then we're going to wrap up because we have a reception, and I want everybody to have a chance to speak. And I don't want to, Eric Mindell, where are you? There you are. I don't want to forget to mention that we have an extraordinary Middle East expert and resource. Dr. Eric Mindell, because he's also a surgeon, but he's not wearing that hat today. And then we have Yuval from the consulate here, the Israeli consulate. And we're all going to be together afterwards, so there's time to speak. Ruth, I have a question here about why there is such little coverage of what's happening in Iraq and Yemen and Sudan and Syria. And there's a magnitude of atrocities, of human rights abuses, and we're not seeing young people march on campuses. We're not seeing the news coverage, and it is, extraordinary human suffering that we're not hearing about.
So I don't know who asked that question, but put it on social media, promote it. Have 50 friends of yours promote it as well. Have each one of them promote it as well. Make a difference. There are people in Sudan right now that are being butchered. They are not killed. They are not massacred. They are being literally butchered, and nobody speaks about it. The United States government recently gave $1.3 billion to Egypt, which it held back for a while for its military purposes. Very few people, very few media outlets speak about it. Right now, there are issues pertaining to the Houthis in Yemen, that they are doing awful things in Yemen itself, but it interests no one. They're actually hurting the economy of a lot of countries, including the US and the West, but also Egypt and other countries, and very few people are talking about it. Why is that? We all know why biases come across and why they happen. But literally, let's ask us that are still suffering. Very little, right? We've spoken about it, we've talked about it, we've delved into it for about a year or so. These atrocities have not gone away. They are still suffering. There's still lots of women being raped. They're still murdering a lot of people. It's not gone away. But nobody talks about it anymore. People have fatigue. Plus, TikTok has algorithms. Ban TikTok. If everybody wants to ban it, it will be banned. It's a matter of legislation. Each Al Jazeera. It's a matter of will. Yes, it's not the same regime. But if there's a will, there's a way. And lots of people are just tired of thinking about conflicts in faraway places. What is trendy and never stops being trendy is us. Raise other issues as well.
Thank you. I want to thank each of you. You're all extraordinary, and hopefully we could keep you here until the end. You'll probably crash, Ruth, at some point. But I also want to thank Mimi Roca, who couldn't be here tonight, who is just ill tonight. She'll be better probably in a couple days, but she felt terribly to not be here. Sonia Zariel, who's like my partner for good, in everything. Laura Sweet, who's like my creative brains behind so much. Laura, thank you so much. And we just appreciate all of you so much.
And you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.